Hey Internet, for this video I'm going to take apart an Android phone and put it back together. This video may be useful for anyone wanting to replace a broken part of their Android phone but are a bit nervous about doing so. Most Android phones are put together nearly the same. Some models may be harder to pry open than others, but generally it's all similar. This video will give you an idea on what to expect when taking apart an Android phone. This phone is an LG Motion 4G, and you can notice it has a cracked digitizer. Our digitizer senses your touch when operating the phone. Sometimes cracked digitizers render the entire or a portion of the screen non-responsive to touch commands. However, in this case, the crack does not affect functionality. Now, if I was going to repair this phone, I would need to replace the digitizer, which requires taking apart the entire phone. I don't have a replacement digitizer, but for the sake of the video, let's pretend I do. Shut down the phone, remove the battery, find the screws that hold the phone together. Using a screwdriver, usually a tiny Phillips one, remove all the back screws. There's usually a bunch of these screws that need to be removed. Note, when trying to prop open the back, it's common to miss a screw and think the back plate simply won't prop open. So make sure you've spotted all the screws holding the back plate. Once all screws are removed, depending on the phone, a good amount of force may be needed to prop open the back. This phone actually required quite a bit of force done off screen before it opened up. Other phones sometimes require very little force to open. Now that the back plate is open, parts of the PCB of the phone are exposed. There may be more screws located around the PCB to separate it from the LCD and digitizer. In this phone's case, there isn't. I'm going to call the PCB of the phone a motherboard since it essentially acts as one. Separate the phone's motherboard from the front. It's actually only held by the camera, LCD, and digitizer connector ribbons. Before removing any connections, use a camera and take a photo of the motherboard while everything is still connected. So when you put it back together, you'll know where everything goes. Once those connections are removed, the motherboard comes right off. Before separating the LCD from the digitizer, let's examine the phone's motherboard for educational purposes. Yes, I call it a motherboard because to me, a cell phone is just a tiny computer. The concept is the same. A phone has a processor, RAM, internal memory, just like any other computer. If you built computers, then working with cell phone internals isn't that much different. You'll see the camera is connected to the motherboard with what looks like the cell phone equivalent to computer IDE ribbons. Volume and power controls also connected to the motherboard via ribbon. This piece of metal shields the internal components, such as the processor, RAM, and storage, and also acts as a heat spreader. Let's open the plate and see what's inside. Here you can see everything is integrated onto the motherboard of the phone. I'm too lazy to identify the parts, but the Hynix chip at the center is probably the RAM. The Qualcomm chip at the top is for sure the processor, since they are major manufacturers of CPUs for mobile devices. And I'm not really sure what these other chips are for. Probably various controllers for cell phone parts like USB controller, radio controller, stuff like that. If any of these chips are broken or burned, it's pretty much game over for the phone, because that's the type of repair that's beyond the ability of most people, me included. The protection plate, like I said earlier, acts as a heat spreader. This is basically what keeps the phone from overheating under load. Alright, now it's time to separate the LCD from the digitizer. Depending on your phone, there may be screws that need to be removed before separating the LCD and digitizer. In my case, there wasn't any, and it simply snapped off. I have to remove the connection ribbons that are attached to the LCD. Remember, before removing any connection ribbons, take a picture, just in case you forget what goes where when putting the phone back together. This tiny thing right here is the phone's front camera. and this is the ribbon that connects the digitizer to the motherboard. As you can see, the LCD is completely intact. The crack is only from the digitizer, so this part doesn't need replacement. Only the digitizer needs to be replaced. So here are the parts that make up this Android phone: LCD, digitizer, motherboard, cameras, and in the top left, the heat spreader. Unfortunately, I do not have a replacement digitizer, so I'll be putting the original broken one back in. But that isn't the point of the video anyways. I simply wanted to show taking apart and putting back together an Android phone is a process that isn't as hard as it would initially seem. At this point, you can essentially replace any physically replaceable part of the phone with new ones. Note, you can only replace parts of your phone with original parts. Don't try putting in an LCD screen from another phone into this one. It probably won't work. Now let's put this back together. If I mess up, the phone will probably not boot at all, and you can all laugh at me. This is where photos taken before removing the connection ribbons come in handy. Putting back the front-facing camera. I have to be careful to put the LCD screen back so that the connector ribbons for the front camera and digitizer are sticking out. Snapping back the heat spreader into the motherboard. Snap the front of the phone and motherboard together. Now the motherboard and front are together. Reconnecting all the ribbon connections back. Refer to the picture taken earlier to see what goes back where. Putting back the volume controls. It's really easy to lose this piece when taking apart a phone, as it sometimes slips out unnoticed. Snapping the back plate in. Make sure it's firmly in place. SIM card back in. Screws back in. And finally the battery. Let's go turn this thing on. Okay, good, it boots up. I didn't destroy the phone after all. Let's check and see if everything works. Touch is working, so the digitizer was installed properly. Camera works too. How about the front camera? Front camera works. Looks like I put it back together properly. No way to test the SIM since it isn't activated, but I think if I had messed up or caused damage while taking it apart, it wouldn't have booted at all. So it's safe to say I did everything correct. And there you have it, taking apart an Android phone and putting it back together. Hope this video was informative. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like. And also, thanks for watching.